The Kraxthari flagship loomed in the darkness of space, a monstrous shadow blotting out starlight. Its black, gleaming hull pulsed with an ominous energy, emitting low-frequency hums that reverberated through the void like the heartbeat of a predator. Smaller ships flanked it in precise formation, each one a deadly testament to the alien empire's technological prowess. Inside the command chamber, Supreme War Commander Extange, his scales shimmering with an iridescent menace, stared at the glowing holographic projection of Earth, his elongated fingers steepled in calculated malice. "Primitive!" he hissed, his voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "This world shall serve as another trophy in the Kraxthari Empire's conquest of the stars." Meanwhile, on Earth, alarms blared across the United Earth Defense Council's high-tech war room. The floor-to-ceiling screens displayed live feeds of the alien fleet as it edged closer to the planet, every ship radiating power that far outstripped anything humanity had ever encountered. The council members sat around a crescent-shaped table, their faces a mix of fear, frustration, and grim determination. "Status report!" barked General Daniels, his voice barely masking the tension constricting his throat. A young analyst at the far end of the room stood rigid, her trembling hands hovering over her console. "The Kraxthari fleet is holding position just beyond lunar orbit. Their flagship has begun transmitting an ultimatum." "Put it through," said President Aldridge, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of the table. The holographic projection of Extange appeared at the room's center, his glowing yellow eyes scanning the humans with a gaze that felt like acid-searing flesh. His voice was an imperious growl, augmented by the Kraxthari's advanced vocal modulation systems. "Humans," he began, elongating the word like a curse, "you stand at the precipice of annihilation. The Kraxthari Empire offers you one chance to surrender and join our dominion as subservient subjects. Refuse, and you shall witness the full might of our obsidian talons, the pinnacle of technological superiority." The hologram dissolved, leaving the room in heavy silence. President Aldridge exhaled slowly, her voice low but firm. "We don't have the technology to match theirs, not even close. Our best defenses would be as effective as a pebble against a tidal wave." "Then what do we do?" demanded General Daniels. "Surrender? Let them turn Earth into another cog in their empire?" "Maybe," murmured Dr. Mallory, the head of R&D. Her calm tone contrasted with the tension in the room. "But maybe we don't fight them on their terms. They rely on technology, yes. But what if there's another way to fight back?" "What kind of way?" Daniels snapped. "We can't out-innovate them overnight." Dr. Mallory tapped a few commands on her tablet, pulling up a dossier on the main screen. "We've been monitoring an engineer at Outpost Gamma 17. He's, unconventional. A bit of a loose cannon, frankly. But his record is filled with impossible successes. If anyone could find a way to exploit their weaknesses, it might be him." "An engineer?" scoffed Daniels. "We're going up against the most advanced fleet in the galaxy, and your answer is to call in a grease monkey?" Mallory smiled thinly. "This isn't just any engineer. Let me show you his file." The screen filled with reports detailing seemingly absurd accomplishments. One mentioned the repair of a quantum reactor using only duct tape and salvage parts. Another described how he had reprogrammed a rogue AI by threatening it with a wrench. Each incident was punctuated with baffled notes from inspectors and accolades from those whose lives he had saved. Aldridge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What's his name?" "Zeke," Mallory replied. "Zeke. No last name listed. Just Zeke." Outpost Gamma 17 was a battered hulk of a space station orbiting Mars, its corridors lined with exposed piping and a permanent scent of burnt circuitry. In one of its cluttered maintenance bays, Zeke stood knee-deep in wires, cursing in several languages as sparks rained down around him. A malfunctioning grav thruster sat gutted before him, its parts scattered like the aftermath of a mechanical autopsy. Zeke's dark hair was matted with sweat, and his grease-streaked face wore the look of a man engaged in a personal vendetta against the laws of physics. "Stupid piece of overpriced scrap," he muttered, tightening a bolt with a wrench that looked like it had been through several wars of its own. "Who designs a system this convoluted? It's like they were drunk and blindfolded. A cheerful chirp came from the corner of the room. Zeke's personal assistant, a battered service bot named Scraps, rolled closer on squeaky wheels. "Incoming message from Earth Defense Council," it announced in its tinny voice. "Priority 1. Zeke didn't look up. "If they want me to sign off on another inspection report, tell them to shove it. I'm busy." "They say it's about saving Earth," Scraps added helpfully. That made Zeke pause. He sighed, tossed his wrench onto the workbench, and turned to the bot. "Fine. Patch it through." The holoscreen flared to life, projecting the solemn faces of President Aldridge and Dr. Mallory. Zeke crossed his arms, his stance defiant. "Whatever it is, the answer's no. I've got my hands full keeping this rust bucket from imploding." "Mr. Zeke," Aldridge began, her tone firm but pleading, "we're facing an existential threat. The Kraxthari fleet is at our doorstep, and our traditional defenses are no match. We've read your file. We need your expertise." Zeke snorted. "My expertise is fixing things other people break. I'm not a soldier, and I sure as hell ain't a hero." Mallory stepped in. "That's exactly why we need you. The Kraxthari rely on technology, overly complex technology. You have a knack for finding flaws in systems no one else sees. If anyone can outthink their engineers, it's you." Zeke rubbed his temples. "You want me to fix alien tech? You do realize I work with duct tape and spite, right?" "Spite might be exactly what we need," Mallory replied, her voice tinged with urgency. "Will you at least hear us out?" Zeke sighed, his gaze flicking to the thruster he'd been repairing. He muttered something under his breath, then nodded. "Fine, but if this turns into a bureaucratic nightmare, I'm walking." Mallory smiled, relief washing over her face. "You won't regret this." "I already do," Zeke replied, grabbing his wrench. "Now let's go save the planet or whatever." As Zeke packed his tools, Scraps whirred beside him. "Are you sure about this, boss?" "Nope," Zeke said, hefting his wrench with a grim grin. "But it sounds like someone's built something too complicated for its own good, and you know how much I love proving bad designs wrong." With that, Zeke strode out of the maintenance bay, ready, or as ready as he'd ever be, to face the challenge of a lifetime. The shuttle rattled as it detached from the Outpost Gamma 17 docking bay, its ancient thrusters roaring in protest. Zeke sat in the co-pilot's seat, his feet propped up on the console as he sipped from a battered thermos. The strong aroma of the black sludge he called coffee filled the small cabin, mingling with the metallic tang of overheated circuits. Across from him, a nervous young lieutenant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, stealing glances at Zeke as if unsure whether to address him or let him stew in silence. "You gonna keep staring, or you got something to say?" Zeke finally grunted, lowering his thermos. The lieutenant cleared his throat. "Sir, I just wanted to say, it's an honor to work with you. Your reputation precedes you." "Yeah? What part? The part where I cussed out the inspection team, or the part where I fixed a life support system with a roll of duct tape and a prayer?" The lieutenant hesitated, his face flushing. Both?" Zeke snorted. "Relax, kid, I'm just a mechanic. All this saving Earth nonsense? Not my usual gig." The shuttle jolted as it hit a pocket of turbulence, and the lieutenant winced. "This ship is an older model," he muttered, trying to make conversation. "Surprised it's still running." "Yeah, well, whoever's maintaining it deserves a medal for creative stupidity," Zeke muttered, leaning forward to tap a few controls. "Half these systems are duct taped together, and the stabilizers are out of sync. Give me 20 minutes and a decent wrench, and I'd have this flying smoother than a baby's lullaby." The lieutenant blinked. "You can fix stabilizers mid-flight?" Zeke grinned, showing far too many teeth. "Kid, I've fixed worse with less." The conversation ended as the shuttle broke through Earth's atmosphere, the sprawling United Earth Defense Council complex coming into view. The landing was rough, too much thrust on the starboard side, but Zeke didn't flinch as the shuttle skidded onto the pad, sending sparks flying. Instead, he grabbed his tool belt and slung it over his shoulder, his movements calm and deliberate. "Time to meet the brass," he muttered, stepping out into the glaring sunlight. The Council's war room was even more chaotic than before. Advisors barked orders, engineers scrambled to update systems, and a palpable sense of tension filled the air. Zeke entered like a storm, his boots clanking against the polished floor. Heads turned, and whispers followed in his wake. That's him? The mechanic? He doesn't even look military. Zeke ignored the murmurs, striding straight to the central table where President Aldridge, General Daniels, and Dr. Mallory waited. He tossed his tool belt onto the table with a thud, eliciting a glare from Daniels. So, Zeke said, folding his arms, what's the plan? Or is this one of those, throw the mechanic at the problem and hope he sticks in scenarios? Daniels bristled. You're speaking to the President of the United Earth. Relax, General, Aldridge interrupted, her tone even. Mr. Zeke, we've brought you here because we believe you can see things our engineers can't. The Kraxthari rely on technology. You're an expert at dismantling complicated systems. Dismantling is one word for it, Zeke muttered. Fine. Show me what we're dealing with. Mallory gestured to the central holographic display where a three-dimensional model of a Kraxthari battlecruiser rotated slowly. Its sleek, obsidian-black hull bristled with weaponry, and glowing conduits ran like veins across its surface. This is one of their smaller ships, Mallory explained. The Obsidian Talons use these as strike vessels, and their technology is far beyond anything we've seen. Zeke leaned closer, studying the hologram with a critical eye. Looks fancy, he said after a moment. Too fancy. Bet it takes half their fleet just to maintain one of these things. Daniels frowned. What are you getting at? Zeke tapped the hologram, zooming in on a cluster of conduits near the ship's stern. Right here. This is their cooling system, right? See how it runs through their primary power grid? Dumb design. Overload the grid, and you'd fry their life support and weapon systems in one go. Mallory's eyebrows shot up. You spotted that in 30 seconds? Yeah, it's obvious. Zeke smirked. Their engineers probably spent more time making it look pretty than making it work. Daniels looked unconvinced. Even if you're right, how do we exploit that? We don't have the firepower to breach their shields. Firepower's overrated, Zeke said, pulling a wrench from his belt and twirling it like a gunslinger. Give me access to their systems and I'll make those shields turn on them faster than you can say quantum cascade. You can do that? Mallory asked, half incredulous. Kid, Zeke replied. I once made a coffee machine invent its own operating system. Alien tech? Just a bigger puzzle. The war room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Then Aldridge spoke, her voice steady. You have our support, Zeke. Whatever resources you need, you'll have them. Zeke grinned. Good. First, I need all the data you've got on their ships, every blueprint, every diagnostic log. Second, I'll need a workshop, somewhere quiet where I can think. We'll set it up, Mallory said quickly. Anything else? Yeah. Zeke's grin widened. Coffee. Lots of coffee. The makeshift workshop was a mess of wires, screens, and half-disassembled machinery. Zeke sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by holograms of Kraxthari systems. His fingers danced across a tablet, pulling apart schematics and rearranging them like a child solving a jigsaw puzzle. Scraps beeped nervously from the corner. Boss, are you sure about this? Their technology is intimidating. Intimidating? Zeke snorted. Scraps, this tech is all bark and no bite. Look at this wiring. It's like they've never heard of redundancy. One well-placed overload, and the whole thing goes up like a Christmas tree. Scraps whirred, clearly unconvinced. But what if they catch you? They won't. Zeke's voice was calm, almost lazy. Because they think they're invincible. That's their biggest weakness, overconfidence. As the hours ticked by, Zeke worked tirelessly, the glow of his tablet illuminating his grease-smeared face. He scribbled notes on scraps of paper, muttering to himself in a mix of technical jargon and profanity. By the time Mallory arrived with an update, Zeke had surrounded himself with piles of makeshift devices, their purposes unclear. How's it going? She asked cautiously. Great, Zeke said without looking up. I've got a plan. Mallory glanced at the chaotic workshop. It looks like madness. Zeke finally looked up, his grin sharp. It is. But trust me, this is the kind of madness that works. Mallory hesitated, then nodded. The fleet arrives in 2 days. No margin for error. Good. Zeke picked up his wrench and gave it a fond tap. 2 days is plenty. Now let's show those alien bastards what real engineering looks like. The countdown reached 0 and the Kraxthari fleet materialized near Earth's largest orbital platform, Eclipse Station. The sky outside the station's viewing deck was swallowed by the sheer size of the flagship, a hulking, angular monstrosity of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Smaller escort ships flanked it, their sleek hulls bristling with weapons that glowed faintly in the vacuum. The Kraxthari were here, and they intended to make an impression. Inside the station, the air was heavy with tension. Earth's delegation stood in a semicircle at the platform's main hangar, their ceremonial uniforms crisp, but their faces taut with barely concealed dread. Soldiers and technicians lingered at the edges, whispering nervously. At the center of it all, Zeke stood out like a smudge on an otherwise pristine canvas. His grease-streaked overalls, battered tool belt, and relaxed posture contrasted sharply with the rigid, polished formality of the delegation. He leaned casually against a maintenance cart, sipping from his thermos. "They're late," Zeke muttered, glancing at the station's oversized chronometer. Figures. Over-engineered types always take their sweet time. "You're not helping," one of the delegation whispered harshly, casting nervous glances at the massive hangar doors. "This is a formal surrender meeting." Zeke smirked. "Formal surrender? Speak for yourselves. I'm just here for the show." Before anyone could respond, the hangar rumbled. The massive outer doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the Kraxthari shuttle. It was a sleek, predatory thing, its surface pulsating with dark energy as it hovered effortlessly into the bay. The air grew colder as the shuttle descended, its landing gear deploying with the precision of a machine that had never known imperfection. The hatch hissed open, and a ramp extended with a theatrical flourish of steam. Supreme War Commander Xtange emerged, his towering frame draped in ceremonial armor that shimmered like liquid obsidian. His yellow eyes scanned the room, brimming with disdain. Behind him, 6 obsidian talons followed, their biomechanical suits humming with barely contained power. Each warrior was a testament to alien engineering, a mix of sleek, intimidating design and deadly function. Xtange's voice boomed, magnified by the translation systems embedded in his armor. "Humans, the time for submission has come." The delegation flinched under his gaze, but Zeke simply took another sip of coffee, eyeing the Kraxthari warriors like a mechanic sizing up a malfunctioning engine. Xtange's eyes locked onto Zeke, narrowing with confusion and disdain. "What is this?" the Kraxthari leader growled. "Where is your champion?" Zeke straightened, adjusting the tool belt slung across his hips. "You're looking at him, big guy." Xtange blinked, his composure faltering for the briefest moment. "This mechanic? This filthy creature is the best Earth has to offer?" "Filthy's a bit harsh," Zeke replied, scratching a grease smudge on his cheek. "Let's go with seasoned." One of the obsidian talons stepped forward, his suit's glowing visor fixed on Zeke. "You mock us. We are the pinnacle of technological evolution. We have destroyed fleets, toppled civilizations." Yeah, Zeke interrupted, waving his wrench dismissively. "You've got fancy suits, big ships, yada yada. But tell me something, pal. Should your left shoulder be making that clicking noise?" The talon paused, glancing at his shoulder. "What clicking?" A distinct click, click, click echoed in the suddenly quiet hangar. Zeke grinned. "That one. Sounds like a misaligned power coupling. Classic rookie mistake." The talon bristled, his armored hand tightening around his weapon. "Silence, insect. You know nothing of our technology." "Oh, I know plenty," Zeke said, pushing off the maintenance cart. "For instance, I know you're routing your plasma regulators through your primary energy grid. Bad move. Overloads are going to be spectacular." Xtange snarled, his voice resonating with anger. "Enough of this insolence. The obsidian talons shall demonstrate why we are unmatched." The hangar erupted into chaos. 2 talons surged forward, their suits glowing with energy as they prepared to fire. Zeke moved faster than anyone expected, diving behind the maintenance cart as twin plasma bolts scorched the air where he'd been standing. "See? Overheating already?" Zeke called, his voice echoing from behind the cart. "Told you that grid was a disaster." The Talons charged, their heavy footfalls shaking the deck. Zeke grinned, grabbing a device from his tool belt. He clicked a button, and the cart he'd been using as cover suddenly whirred to life, its built-in diagnostic system letting out a shrill beep. "Catch!" Zeke shouted, shoving the cart toward the advancing warriors. The lead Talon raised his weapon to blast the cart, but it exploded before he could fire, not in flames, but in a blinding spray of foam and sparks. The alien stumbled back, his suit's systems glitching as the foam clung to every joint and crevice. What is this?" the Talon sputtered, his voice distorted by the sudden malfunction. "Maintenance-grade industrial lubricant," Zeke replied, ducking behind a nearby console. "Great for loosening bolts. Not so great for fancy alien battlesuits." Another Talon lunged for him, swinging a blade that glowed with plasma energy. Zeke rolled to the side, his wrench connecting with the warrior's knee joint in a sharp metallic clang. The Talon stumbled, his movements suddenly jerky. "Servo timing's all off," Zeke said conversationally, darting away. "You guys really ought to fire your engineers." From the viewing deck above, the Earth delegation watched in stunned silence. This is madness," one of them muttered. "This," Dr. Mallory whispered, her eyes wide, "is working." Xtange bellowed in frustration, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Enough! Destroy him!" The remaining Talons moved in unison, surrounding Zeke with their weapons raised. Zeke, crouched beside a junction box, tapped a series of commands into a small handheld device. "Just one more thing," he muttered. "A little tweak to their environmental systems, and bingo." A loud hiss filled the hangar as the Talons' suits began venting steam. One by one, their weapons powered down, their movement slowed, and their glowing visors flickered erratically. "What is happening?" Xtange roared, his voice tinged with panic. "Simple," Zeke said, standing and dusting off his overalls. "Your suit's cooling systems? They're tied to your environmental controls. Overheat the system and—" He gestured to the steaming Talons. "Well, you get the picture." Xtange's eyes burned with fury, but his voice was tight with desperation. "You cannot defeat us. Our technology is—" "Superior?" Zeke finished with a grin. "Buddy, I've seen better tech on a vending machine." As the last of the Talon's suits sputtered and froze, Zeke hefted his wrench onto his shoulder and turned to the stunned delegation. "Told you, over-engineered junk." Mallory, her voice shaky, whispered, "What do we do now?" Zeke shrugged, his grin widening. "Now? We make 'em sweat, and trust me, they're not built for that." The hangar fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the sputtering of the Kraxthari warriors' suits as they vented steam. Zeke leaned casually against a nearby console, tapping the side of his thermos as if waiting for someone to catch up with him. Above, the Earth delegation stared through the viewing glass, jaws slack, as the so-called mechanic turned the might of the Obsidian Talons into little more than a malfunctioning sideshow. "You dare humiliate us?" Xtange growled, his voice trembling with rage as his glowing yellow eyes flicked between his immobilized warriors and the infuriating human who had bested them. "We are the apex of evolution, the greatest warriors in the galaxy. And yet," Zeke said, taking a leisurely sip of his sludge-like coffee, "you can't even stop a guy with a wrench and a caffeine habit. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?" The Supreme Commander's claws twitched at his sides, scraping audibly against his armor. "Enough of these games," he barked, his voice amplified by the suits of his remaining warriors. "Activate the contingency protocols." A low hum vibrated through the air as the Kraxthari warriors' suits suddenly flared to life, their steaming joints locking back into position. The glowing visors regained their intensity, and the whir of power surged through their limbs as their systems reset. Around them, the smaller Kraxthari drones began to activate as well, their metallic forms detaching from the shuttle and hovering in the air, weapons aimed directly at Zeke. Zeke let out a slow, deliberate whistle, his eyes narrowing at the nearest drone. "Well, look at that. They've got backup toys." The drones fired in unison, a volley of searing plasma bolts streaking toward him. Zeke dove behind a stack of crates as the shots peppered the floor where he had been standing, leaving scorch marks that smoked and hissed. The air smelled of burnt metal and ozone, and the heat was enough to bead sweat on Zeke's already grease-slicked brow. "Good effort!" Zeke shouted over the noise, crawling along the floor toward a maintenance panel. "But I've got bad news for you," Xtange snarled, stepping forward as his warriors closed in. "Your insolence will be your undoing, human." "Maybe," Zeke replied, prying open the panel with a quick flick of his wrench. Sparks cascaded out as he reached into the mess of wires. "Or maybe your undoing will be this poorly shielded power relay." He twisted two wires together, and suddenly the overhead lights in the hangar flickered, casting an eerie strobe effect over the scene. The drones nearest to him wobbled in the air, their targeting systems faltering. "Really, guys," Zeke said, shaking his head as he disconnected another wire, "you should have known better than to tie your local systems into the station grid. That's engineering 101. One of the drones spun erratically and crashed into a nearby support beam, shattering in a spray of sparks. Another veered wildly, its plasma cannons firing into the ceiling. The Kraxthari warriors hesitated, their once flawless coordination now disrupted by the chaos. "You see what's happening, don't you?" Zeke said, standing up and brushing his hands off. "Your systems are too smart for their own good, all interconnected, all relying on each other to keep ticking. That's not strength, my shiny friends. That's a liability." Xtange's fists clenched, and his voice dropped to a low, venomous growl. "You think yourself clever, human, but your luck will run out. Warriors, destroy him!" The remaining Talons surged forward, their suits roaring with renewed energy. Zeke didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for the device clipped to his belt, a small cube patched together with duct tape and scavenged parts. He pressed a button, and a low-frequency pulse rippled through the hangar. One of the charging Talons stumbled mid-stride, its glowing visor flickering. Another froze entirely, its arms jerking like a marionette controlled by a drunken puppeteer. The sound of metal grinding against metal filled the air as their suits struggled against the interference. "Ah," Zeke said, stepping out from behind his cover with a triumphant grin. "I was wondering when the harmonic disruptor would kick in. Guess I calibrated it just right." "What have you done?" one of the warriors demanded, his voice cracking as his suit's translation matrix began outputting in fragmented syllables. "Simple," Zeke said, hefting his wrench like a knight wielding a sword. "Your systems? They're too dependent on synchronized quantum harmonics. One little nudge and, well, you're seeing it for yourselves." The immobilized warriors stared at their malfunctioning comrades as their own suits began to show signs of distress. Steam hissed from vents that shouldn't have been open, and lights flickered erratically across their sleek armor. Xtange's expression twisted into something between rage and disbelief. "This cannot be. Our technology is infallible." "Famous last words," Zeke quipped. "Tell you what, I'll make this quick. You can surrender now, or I can show you what happens when I reprogram your suits to start quoting bad Earth poetry." "You wouldn't dare!" Xtange spat. "Oh, I dare," Zeke replied, brandishing his wrench with a gleam in his eye. "It's just a matter of cross-wiring your audio systems with—" "Enough!" Xtange roared, raising his hand. "Talons, fall back! Activate the shuttle defenses!" The shuttle's hull groaned as panels slid open, revealing an array of mounted cannons that swiveled toward Zeke. Their energy cores hummed ominously, the sound vibrating through the hangar as the cannons began to charge. Zeke cocked his head, a curious look on his face. "Now that's interesting. Your shuttle's power distribution seems a little uneven. I wonder—" He bolted toward the shuttle, zigzagging to avoid the first few blasts as the cannons opened fire. The energy bolts scorched the deck, the heat rippling through the air. Zeke reached the base of the shuttle and scrambled up onto its side, his boots finding purchase on the smooth metal. "What is he doing?" one of the Kraxthari warriors asked, his voice tinged with panic. "Breaking your toys," Zeke called down, popping open a panel on the shuttle's hull. He reached inside, sparks flying as he yanked out a bundle of wires. "Looks like someone routed your weapon systems through the life support. That's just asking for trouble." "Stop him!" Xtange bellowed, but it was too late. With one final twist of his wrench, Zeke triggered a cascade failure in the shuttle's systems. The cannons powered down, their energy cores emitting weak, pitiful whines before going dark. The lights on the shuttle flickered, and the Kraxthari warriors froze as the quantum-linked systems in their suits responded in kind. "Well," Zeke said, hopping down from the now useless shuttle, "that about does it." Xtange fell to his knees, his once imposing frame sagging under the weight of defeat. You cannot." "Buddy," Zeke said, leaning on his wrench with a smirk, "you spent so much time making things complicated. You forgot one basic rule. The more moving parts, the easier it is to break." The hangar erupted in a cacophony of cheers from the Earth delegation above. Soldiers pounded the viewing glass, shouting Zeke's name. He tilted his thermos in a mock toast, then turned back to Xtange. "Now, let's talk about that surrender." Xtange knelt in the middle of the hangar, the proud gleam of his obsidian armor dulled under the harsh fluorescent lights. Steam hissed softly from the vents of his immobilized warriors, the remnants of their once mighty suits now little more than hollow shells. Around him the air buzzed with muted voices, Earth's delegation celebrating cautiously behind the safety of the observation deck. He felt the weight of every decision, every moment of hubris that had led to this humiliation. Zeke stood a few feet away, his tool belt slung low, one hand gripping his ever-faithful wrench. He gave the alien leader a once-over, then leaned in, his tone almost conversational. "So, how's it feel? All that shiny tech, all those years of galactic conquest, stopped cold by a guy with a bad attitude and a pocket full of spare parts." Xtange's claws flexed against the floor, his voice low and simmering. "This is not over, human." Zeke smirked, tapping his wrench against his thigh. "Oh, I think it is. You've got two choices, lizard boy. Option 1, you call this quits, sign whatever peace treaty the brass shoves in front of you, and you slink back to whatever corner of the galaxy you came from. Option 2? He let the wrench rest on his shoulder, his grin widening. "We see how much worse I can make this for you." The Kraxthari warriors stirred uneasily, their malfunctioning suits letting out faint beeps and clicks. One, whose visor flickered erratically, muttered in their native tongue, "He's not bluffing." Xtange glared at his subordinate, his pride clashing with the bitter taste of reality. Slowly he rose to his full height, towering over Zeke despite the dented armor and faltering servos. You have no honor." "Honor?" Zeke laughed, the sound sharp and unrestrained. "You show up on someone's doorstep with a fleet of death machines and demand they kneel, and you're talking to me about honor? Please." The alien leader's jaw tightened, his claws curling into fists. For a moment it seemed he might lash out, pride outweighing reason. Then, as the last of the shuttle's systems sputtered and died, leaving the once mighty ship a powerless husk, Xtange closed his eyes and exhaled a slow, grudging breath. "Very well." The Earth delegation below erupted into cheers, their collective relief palpable as they watched the towering alien leader bow his head. Soldiers clapped each other on the back, and technicians whooped with joy, their voices echoing off the hangar walls. The celebration was short-lived, however, as Zeke raised a hand and turned back to Xtange. "Before we wrap this up," he said, his tone suddenly serious, "let's get one thing straight. You can go back to your empire and tell them whatever story makes you feel better. Say you were outnumbered. Say the humans cheated. Hell, say your tech glitched. But if you so much as think about pulling this stunt again—" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "I'll be waiting. And next time, I won't just break your toys. I'll redesign them so your own tech turns against you before you even leave your ship. Got it?" The room went still. Even the Kraxthari warriors, for all their pride, looked cowed under the weight of Zeke's words. Xtange met his gaze, his glowing yellow eyes dulling with reluctant acceptance. "Understood," Zeke nodded. "Good talk." By the time the treaty was signed, Zeke had already wandered off to inspect a power coupling on one of the station's docking bays. The brass had insisted he stay for the formalities, but he'd waved them off, muttering something about loose wiring and a potential coolant leak. As the hangar filled with the noise of victory and diplomacy, Zeke found peace in the hum of machinery, his calloused hands deftly tightening a bolt on a panel. Mallory found him there, leaning against the wall with his thermos in hand. She didn't speak right away, just watched him for a moment, her face a mix of amazement and exasperation. "You know," she said finally, breaking the silence, "you just changed the course of galactic history, and you're out here fixing a docking bay." Zeke shrugged, taking a long sip of his coffee. "Someone's got to do it." Mallory laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Yeah, well," Zeke replied, standing and wiping his hands on his grease-streaked coveralls. "Impossible's kind of my thing." The Kraxthari fleet limped back into hyperspace a few hours later, their ships barely operational and their pride in tatters. The Earth delegation celebrated well into the night, their victory sending ripples across every corner of the galaxy. News spread fast, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. By the time the story reached the outer colonies, Zeke was no longer just a mechanic. He was a legend. Months later, Zeke sat in his workshop on Outpost Gamma 17, surrounded by the comforting clutter of half-finished projects and salvaged parts. Scraps, his ever-loyal bot, rolled up with a fresh pot of coffee. "Boss," Scraps chirped, "you've got another message from Central Command." "Something about an alien coalition requesting your expertise?" Zeke groaned, rubbing his temples. "Another one? Don't they have actual engineers for this stuff?" "They seem to think you're the best," Scraps said, its tone almost apologetic. Zeke sighed, setting down his wrench. "Fine, patch it through." The holoscreen flared to life, revealing a nervous-looking ambassador flanked by two unfamiliar alien figures. "Mr. Zeke," the ambassador began, "thank you for taking the time to—" "Cut to the chase," Zeke interrupted, waving a hand. "What's the problem?" The ambassador coughed awkwardly. "The Andromedan Confederation has developed a quantum encryption system they believe is unhackable. They're requesting your assistance in testing its vulnerabilities." Zeke stared at the screen for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair with a slow, incredulous laugh. "Unhackable, huh? Bet their environmental controls are tied to their central systems, again." The ambassador hesitated. "Actually, yes. How did you know?" Zeke groaned, grabbing his wrench. "Idiots. I swear, it's like the whole galaxy's allergic to good engineering." "Fine, I'll take a look. But if I fix it, they owe me a year's supply of coffee." Scraps beeped as Zeke stood, tossing his wrench into his tool belt. "Boss, are you really going to do this again?" Zeke smirked, heading for the docking bay. "Of course. Someone's got to teach these aliens how to build things right." As the workshop door slid shut behind him, Zeke couldn't help but grin. The galaxy might have its share of fancy ships and high-tech warriors, but at the end of the day, all it took to win was a wrench, a little ingenuity, and a whole lot of attitude. And if there was one thing Zeke had in spades, it was attitude.